Hey, welcome back, Team Resistance, to Program Apprentice Training. It's Jim Huffman, mentor since 2012. This lesson's going to be on the joysticks and game pads. We're going to review the even-odd challenge, and by adding the fourth DI and the fourth DO and modifying the sequence. And to do that, we're also going to break it up and add a counting function. After we finish with that, we're going to get into the joysticks. Logitech, Xbox, Nintendo. Cheap way of getting joysticks on your program. So we're going to review the documentation and then add the joysticks and buttons to the code. So let's get going. Here's the code. I've already added the purple button and the purple LED. So what changes do we need to make to the code? Well, I've decided to use the switch case statement. So here it is. Here's the switch case, and all I had to do was add the purple button to the count, right? Button count, I changed the name, but button count, increment it if the red's on, the yellow's on, the green's on, increment it each time. And then use that count, and then the only change I needed to make in the case statement was to add this case 4. That's 4 is even, therefore turn on the even combination, right? So that was pretty straightforward, nothing hard about that. But you know what? I think we can improve that. So let's take this little batch of code here, these 4, and let's move them. Let's move them down to their own function, right? Button count function. We could probably use that in a couple different places. I've already copied it down so we can see there's the button count, the same thing. If it's red, increment button. We've created a new button count, right? Button count, button count, button count. Incremented each time depending on the colors. But let's take a look at this real carefully. There's 3 button counts now, right? Note that there's a button count method, right? And now there's a second button count within that method, within the button count method. Normally I wouldn't do this because you can already see how that could get real confusing. But this is the magic of object-oriented programming. The button count within this button count method is encapsulated. It cannot be seen outside of this button count method. The button count method and the button count object, well, the compiler knows those are 2 separate things. So even though they're named the same, and normally we wouldn't do this, the object-oriented programming allows you to. If you're working with somebody else, you'd want to, you might want to create this button count method and use button count object. And then whoever's using your method might want to use button count. You can see up here in our LED count, update LED count, we've got another button count. So all 3 of those are separate things. They're the object-oriented programming. The compilers understand that and take care of it. So just be aware of that you can do it. Probably shouldn't if you're the programmer. But if you have multiple programmers, they all want to use the word button count. It may happen, and the object-oriented program will help you prevent that being an issue. So what other changes do we have to make? Well, we need to call that method. We need to store the return from that, from button count method. Button count method, right? So button count method is going to return the button count, and we're going to store it in the button count object, integer. And we should be ready to go. Let's go, let's save it, Control S, right? All right, let's start the simulator. Simulate on desktop. Start the GUI. And there it is. All right. So now we've got our purple button, right? We can label it purple button, right? Looks good. We can label our purple LED. Good to go. All right. We're doing all this in test, so let's go ahead and start the test. We've got an even count, right? So even is the green LED. Oh, we forgot to turn off the purple, but that's all right. We can fix that later. But the green is on. If I turn off one of them, the red is on. The green went off. Let's go back to even. We've got the green on, the red off, odd one more time just for show and tell. We've got the red on for odd, the green is off, and finally if we turn them all off, right, neither the green nor the red are on. So we just need to fix this thing with the purple and add it to our turn off the yellow, and we should be good to go. Tell you what though, while we're here in the simulator, let's take a look at the joystick. Well, first let's go take a look at some information on the joysticks. Here's our favorite website, right? Documentation's WPI Lib. I'm in the robot simulation, and down here are these two areas, right? We've got the joysticks and we got system joysticks and joysticks. Kind of confusing, but that's all right. We can figure it out. Joysticks, this list of joysticks connected to your system, right? Connected to your computer or to the driver station. Joysticks, this is the joysticks that the robot code can pull directly from. All right? So those are the two areas we're interested in. So let's go back and take a look at them in live system. Well, right now I have no joysticks hooked up. So our system joysticks are showing all nulls or empty, not assigned, whatever. And of course, if you don't have anything assigned, nothing in joysticks. Well, guess what? I have two joysticks. I don't have a Logitech, but I do have one of these. I'm sure a bunch of you guys have them, right? The old Xbox, right? The old Xbox. And if that isn't, you don't have any of those, well, maybe you've got one of these laying around, right? Right? The old Nintendo. Good old Nintendos. Well, the first one I'm going to plug in is the Xbox. All right? I'm going to take the USB and we're just going to plug in the Xbox controller. All right? So now the Xbox controller is plugged in. And as you can see, I've now got an Xbox controller indicated on my system joysticks. Well, let's go ahead and plug in the Nintendo and see what shows up. And now the Nintendo is plugged in, and as you can see, that it says USB gamepads. So this is a generic. This is actually a Varela Nintendo gamepad. So it shows up as a generic. If I push any of the buttons on the gamepad, though, you see the gamepad changes color. If I push them on the Xbox, right, the Xbox changes color. Right? So great. They're hooked up. We're actually reading them. We haven't had to add anything to code, right? Because this area over here, joysticks, is what actually references code. It says drag and drop to joysticks. So let's grab one of these. Let's drag it over here. Oh, look, drop it in here. It's now assigned as joystick 0, right? If I press any of the buttons on the Xbox, right, you can see that these buttons light up down here. Grab the gamepad, right, and I can drop it here. If I push any of the buttons on the gamepad, they light up. We're good so far, all right? Well, let's think about this though. Our normal, and let's get used to this, our normal gamepad Logitech controllers, joystick controllers, are usually the first 3 assigned because that's what we usually use for competition. So rather than assigning them as joysticks 0, 1, or 2, let's move them all the way over. It doesn't matter really because we can put them anywhere. We can drag it over here to the Xbox over to joystick 3 and the Nintendo over to joystick 4. All right, so far so good. So I press the A button on Nintendo and sure enough button 1 fires off. Right? Press the B button backwards. B button, button 2 fires off. X button, button 3, Y button, button 4. I think this one is 5, your bumper, your left bumper, your right bumper. The reset, nope, back button. There's a back button. That actually is mapped. Select is mapped. I got 2 more. The joysticks themselves can be pressed. And you got a 9 and a 10. Well, that's great. So now we go to the Nintendo. I press the A button. Button 2 shows up. Press the B button. Button 3. The X button. Button 1. Y button. The bumpers. The bumpers actually are mapped the same. Great. How about the reset button? Reset button and the select are also mapped correctly, 9 and 10. So the nice thing is though, we can figure them out, and you'll have to know what gamepad you're running on, whether you're doing 4 or 5, but those all seem to light up, all the buttons on here. So we're good so far. Now, so we can map this stuff. Oh, there's some other stuff here. There's also axis and POVs. See the axis here? Stuff called axis. Well, what are those? Those are the joysticks, the little joysticks on here. Normally the Logitech only has 1 joystick. All right, each joystick has its own axis. X-axis is left and right, and the Y-axis is up and down, just like a regular Cartesian mapping. So if I push the left, notice what happens to axis 0. Left. If I go right on it, right? If I go right on it, it goes to +1. If I go left, it goes to -1. Let's take a look at the y-axis, right? Ah, there it is. It's on the axis 1. So the y can be read by reading axis 1. But notice when I push up, it reads -1. If I push down, it reads +1. All right? Reason for that is the joysticks were originally designed for use as a flight simulator. So pushing up on the joystick caused the nose of the plane to go down or negative. So they decided to do that with the joysticks, and we've just lived with it ever since. We can reverse that. We can play with it. How about these guys? Well, if I go left and right, axis 2. Up and down, axis 3. There's 2 more buttons here. There's 2 throttles. There's a left and a right throttle. Notice they are 4 and 5. That's all great except for one little thing. The driver station doesn't map them that way. The driver station maps these 2 buttons here as 3 and 4 because you only, on a normal Logitech, you only get 1 joystick. So this is joystick 0 and 1, right and up and down. This was a throttle, and this is a throttle on the joystick, Logitech joystick. So they added the right joystick pad after the fact. Well, we can fix that. They've identified that. And see this little thing, this little map as a gamepad. If we click that, right? Now, if the left, right is still 0 and 1, but the right is now 4 and 5. And the throttles here are the 3 and 4. Or 2 and 3, sorry about that. All right, so you can map that. Well, what about the Nintendo? Well, the Nintendo doesn't have any gamepads, sort of. It shows axis. Well, this little pad over here does work as a gamepad, but if I press it, it reads -1, 1, -1, 1. Right? So the only thing you can get out of here is 0, 1, and -1. You can't get between those numbers. Right? Not a big problem. We're only this is only used for testing. Doubt that we'd ever use the Nintendo for actual gameplay. Checking the map as gamepad doesn't do a thing for it. Doesn't change anything. There isn't a second. There's no throttles. There's no second joystick. So we're good on that. Well, there's one more thing. Wait, there's more. What about this POV? This POV, where does it come in? Right, right there. See POV? Right down here. Oop, wrong one. There is no POV on the Nintendo, but there is. It's this little push button up here in the corner. When you're not pushing it, it reads -1. If you push up, it reads 0. And as you go clockwise around it, it goes 45, 90, 135, 180, 215, 270, up to 315, right? So as you can use that for turning to direction, maybe? I don't know, you know. We'd have to play with it, see how we could use it, but we might be able to use that. So that's all the controls that we have available to us, all right? So let's go see how we would use those in software. Let's close the simulator. Let's go back to code. So let's add the joysticks. I've cheated, obviously. I'm adding the joysticks. I'll move these up to hardware because they are really hardware inputs. But I've added a Xbox joystick, and again, I've added it to number 3. Right? The Nintendo joystick, I've added it to joystick 4. I've copied down the button count code and created a new method called button count joystick Xbox. Right? So I'm going to be counting the buttons on the Xbox. Right? Xbox joystick. The method for that is called get raw, and then whatever button number you want. Right? So the A button was button 1. The B button was button 2, the X button is button 3, and the Y was number 4. So I can now push these buttons and should be able to count them in combination and get a count. So what other changes do I need to make to implement this? Well, let's roll back up to here where we had button count. Well, we were calling button count for the digital inputs. Now we're calling it for the joystick inputs, right? Button count, and there's my joystick X. And that's it. That's the only change we had to make in the main code. So let's go up and start the simulator. All right. So right now, we're going to start the test mode, right? We put all our code in test. And we should be able to watch these buttons down here as I press them. I'm going to press the A button. Right? So the red, we have an odd number of buttons pressed, just one button pressed, right? So the red LED is on, right? There's the red LED, is the only one on out of the two. Right? Still only one. I press the B button, press the X button, press the Y button. Let's try pressing A and B, right? I've got two buttons pressed and the green is now on. Press 2, the X and the Y, and now the green is still lit up. If I don't press any, they all go out. Press them this way, green lights up, even number. How about if I go 3 buttons? 3 buttons pressed, and it's odd. Yay! All right. So that works. You can now use your button inputs to test your code. All right. So that's exciting, right? All right. Let's take one more quick look. Let's close this. We're done with the simulator. I'm going to take one quick look. I have mapped, or we have mapped over the years. Here's the Logitech, right? Here's the different buttons that you can map. Here's what the axis. Here's the POV, right? There's the POV on top. There's a little, if you twist this handle, there's a Z-axis, right? There's all buttons around the sides. Here's the Xbox gamepad. Same idea. There's the, we talked about the axis 0, axis 1, 4, 5. The throttles here at the top are, or they call them triggers, are the axis 2 and axis 3. Buttons around the pads. Mode isn't used. And of course the Nintendo. I will post a link to these on the Discord so that you can get to them. And should look good. All right. All right, so we've covered adding the 4 DOs. We broke out accounting, and then we went through joysticks and game pads and how to add the joystick hardware and the buttons. So the challenge for next week or next lesson will be to add a few more buttons to button count. Actually, probably button count joystick X. Maybe assign a joystick Nintendo, add buttons from there, or just joysticks and add buttons from both of them. They should work as a combination from either joystick. Be constructive, be patient, be flexible. Next time we're going to get into a better display than the simulator. So that should be fun. So be inclusive, have fun, and be safe. And we'll see you next lesson.